Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto got married to Yandere Ace? Movie. What's so funny? The boy kept laughing, heedless of his bloodied nose. You just don't get it, do you? The man of steel reluctantly lowered his fist, clenched knuckles loosening. Get what? I can't die, came the reply, palms spread out in the time-told gesture of a shrug. I'm immortal, idiot. I've got a demon sealed inside of me, and my imagination. Remember? So if I were to imagine, say, that I was 10 times stronger. Wham! His fist flew forward, a heel palm snapping the caped crusader backwards. The follow-up, a knee to the stomach, sent him sprawling. His brief advantage didn't last, however. In the time that it took for him to catch his breath, he found himself pounded right back into the ground all over again. It doesn't matter how strong you are, you can't win this. A groan rose from the streets of Metropolis. I wonder about that. What? Naruto tilted his head slightly, regarding Superman with thinly veiled amusement. Ace's face was practically apocalyptic now, dark hair lofting around her face as though it were actually alive. Alive and ready to lash out at the one who dared to touch her precious person. Oh, he knew that look. He laughed again, coughing blood. Soups? You really should stop fighting me and get the censored away from there, because things are going to get ugly in 4, 3, 2. Then Ace frowned, her eyes meeting those of Clark Kent. A whisper followed. Pain. And the world flared a blinding white. Dear Diary. My name is Ace and this is my first entry, I think. Naruto smuggled this into my cell last night, told me I should write in it. He even taught me how. I like it. A nice, safe, secret place to write stuff the warden can't find. Stuff I can't tell anybody else. Even him. I'm 10 years old now, it's been a year since he became my friend. He likes to play the same games as me but he doesn't like playing house. He calls it silly. I don't care. He makes me happy. You make me happy too, Dadbayo. Naruto. This is my diary. Dear Diary. The headmaster says I'm going to die next year. I don't want to die. I'm only 11. He says I have tumors in my brain. That I'm defective. What does that mean? I have headaches sometimes. Are those tumors? I get sick easily, too. Naruto says he's a liar. But what if he isn't? What if he isn't lying? What if I really am going to die? Naruto says he won't let me, but I think he's scared, too. I don't want to die. Dear Diary, my head doesn't hurt anymore. Naruto did something strange to me today, on my 12th birthday, I'm not sure what. He put a hand on my head, and it really hurt. But now my head doesn't hurt anymore. The doctors are calling it a miracle. They say my tumors are completely gone. That I'm in remission, whatever that means. I don't care. Naruto cured me. I'm so happy. I gave him a big hug. He got really quiet after that, then he hugged me back. The guards call him a demon, but I don't think he's a demon. I think he's an angel. Dear Diary, they made Naruto and me fight 10 and the others today. I thought he would win. He's always won before whenever he fought them one-on-one. I was so sure. He's so strong, so happy, but today was different. They went after him first and he lost. It wasn't fair. We're only 13. They're all older than us. They ganged up on him. They were kicking him, laughing. So I hurt them. I hurt them so bad, dearie Diary. I think I'm falling in love him. To the future me who might reading this, you know who I'm talking about. Naruto. My life, light, love, my happiness, my all. It's stupid, I know. I shouldn't even be writing in this anymore. If he finds it, I die of embarrassment. The others laugh at me, tell me I don't know what love is. King, Jack, 10, Queen. I hate them. Hate their stupid nicknames for each other. Hate them all. King thinks he's the leader but he really isn't. He's nothing. Like the rest. Queen's no better, but she's terrified of me now, like the rest. She can only hurt me with words now. She doesn't try to take Naruto away from me anymore. She knows better. I think she hates me. Good. I hate her too. I should kill her. I should kill them all. Today I made 10 run face first into a tank for beating Naruto during combat practice. He may not be able to feel pain, but I'm sure his ego felt that. Let's see him laugh at me. Now, I hate him. I hate them all. Except Naruto. He's almost always with me now, and that makes me happy. We share everything. Even the same bed. The guards don't trust him to have a cell of his own after his last escape attempt. Did you know he's tried to break out of here at least 70 times before they locked him in with me? If he escapes now, I'd be sad. Funny thing though, he hasn't tried. Stupid guards must have finally learned their lesson after all. New entry now. Naruto hurt Jack for me today. He called me ugly. Now he's missing an arm. Made me happy. They managed to reattach it, though. Pity. I want to leave this place. I want to go out and see the world. I want to live like a normal who am I kidding? Girl. Not be trapped in this prison for the rest of my days. I want to see it with him. Everybody but Naruto and me can just go die. I want to leave this place with him, leave everything far behind. I want to hold on to this feeling forever, no matter the cost. Sometimes, Ace wondered if she was crazy. At times, she certainly felt like it when writing in her diary. Why, she wondered. Had she always been insane? Perhaps. Certainly there had been a breaking point somewhere when along the line, a day, perhaps when she'd gone over the edge, past the point of no return. A line crossed, her sanity lost, a friendship gained. Over the last 5 years she'd struggled with the idea of it all. That she'd lost her mind without ever realizing it. What did it mean to be insane? To have lost her sanity, something she'd never truly had? Of course, she wanted to kill those who had hurt her, hurt Naruto. Those who had poked and prodded at him with their needles and the knives and done such awful things to her mind. Yes, Ace wanted the world to burn for what had been done to the two of them, and yes, by God, she cared for Naruto far more than she should. Maybe it was that last part that made her so screwy. Because in this world, despite all that had been done to her, all the torment, all the torture, all of the hell she'd suffered through, Ace had a friend. A dear, precious person from whom she'd do anything, someone she'd fight for, kill, even die if need be. He was her rock, her pillar, her everything. 5 years since she'd found him, since he'd found her, since she'd had her first taste of light in this wretched squalor of darkness. 5 since they'd met, since she'd started the diary. Looking back at her entries, some of them were downright childish, though her most recent wasn't all much better. It could even be said that she love whatcha doing. Naruto. A startled squeak forced itself between her lips when the blonde's head inexplicably appeared over her shoulder, peering in the fading evening light. Ooh, are you writing about me again? Ace's face, then her entire body colored in an atomic blush beneath her dark dress. No, you can't look. She snapped her diary shut and jerked upright from the bench with a strangled yelp, long hair fluttering in the breeze as she scrambled away from his questing hands. When he laughed and tried to follow, she flattened him against the wall. The poor boy groaned, his lips parting in a pained smile. With his powers, he could have easily wriggled free, but instead he just lay there, chuckling. Okay, that's just not fair, Tibeo. I wasn't going to peek, just wanted to brush your hair. Ace blinked, recognizing the worn brush in his hand, the only one they were allowed to own. Hurriedly she released him, flushing. Of course, that made him topple forwards onto his face. Another groan followed. A laugh leapt from her lips against her will as she hurried to him, helping him up. So amused was she that she momentarily forgot about her hesitation to touch him. Her hand closed around his arm, tugging the older boy onto his feet. He raised his head and favored her with a withering glare, a half-hearted growl. So glad you find my pain funny, ya know, oops. Those eyes flashed. You do know what this means, I trust. Ace paled, shrinking back as he started forwards. Oh, she knew that look. That look was nothing good. This means war. Tickle attack no jutsu. No, Naruto don't you da. Ace. With her name a war cry on his lips, the blonde pounced. They went down in a tangle of arms and legs there in the 4 walls that comprised the room that was their cell, she squealing, and he, laughing. Before long, she joined him, giggling as they tumbled about like a pair of schoolyard children. This was what she loved about him. He could pluck her up out of the worst moods with ease. Put a smile on her face like no other. She fell more and more in love with each passing day. And she couldn't bear to tell him. The idea of losing their friendship hurt even more than her feelings remaining unrequited. Even if it hurt. His crow of triumph drew her back to reality before that jagged thought could cut her, before it could bleed her dry. Victory will be mine. Oh, no you don't. She wrestled with him, rolling, and to her surprise, came out on top. Her thin legs straddled him, her arms pinning his shoulders down to the pristine white floor. Her hair hung down around them like a curtain, a shroud around the two of them, hiding their faces away from the cruel, painful world they called home. Naruto suddenly went very still in her arms. An odd, unreadable look glinted there in his eyes, just like a spry spark of sorts, dancing in those baby blue orbs. Now, more than ever, she wished she could read his mind. In the end, she didn't have to. I want to beep him. The intensity of the thought surprised Ace. As did the desire that came with it. She'd be lying if she said she hadn't thought about it, but now that the opportunity was here, presented before her, dangling only an inch or so away. This close she realized his scent was subtly different. It had a tangy, metallic smell to it, something mingling with the sweat. Was that a fleck of blood on his shoulder? No, she was probably just imagining that. She had to be. Wait, what am I doing? To her dismayed delight, the psychic goddess realized she was cupping his cheeks in her hands, cradling Naruto's visage to hers. An arm tightened on her hips, pulling her closer. Something broke. Soft. That was her first thought as her lips found Naruto's mouth, molding over him with a soft moan of a groan. She'd no idea who'd initiated the beep, and quite frankly she didn't care. It was soft, it was sweet, and it was everything she'd hoped her first beep to ever be. All too soon it ended, her best friend pulling away. No, she wanted more. She wanted to hold on to this feeling forever, until the day she died. She lingered there a moment longer, panting softly. Na meep. Squealing, Ace found herself swung about, sailing as he rolled abruptly, sitting up and pulling her into his lap. She found herself spun about, her back to him, the brush suddenly in her hair. Neither spoke of the beep, the brief, intimate moment between the two of them. All right. Time to brush out those knots. Unbidden, a hand darted to her own raven locks, playing with a few strands. They had been almost boyishly once upon a time, barely reaching her shoulders. Now it cascaded down her back in a curtain of ebon tresses, swatting him in the face as she darted a ways. Naruto liked long hair. He had mentioned it once, last year when he'd been combing her dark tresses. She hadn't been able to bring herself to cut it ever since. I don't like these blasted things, she murmured. They don't like me. Hey, he grunted, I like you. That's all that matters. Ace dared a smile, her cheeks warming beneath the unexpected praises. As much as she hated Cadmus in all its entirety, she was at least a little grateful that it had brought the two of them together. She loved it when he brushed her hair. He was the only one. She'd driven her parents into a catatonic state as a little girl, but she couldn't do that to Naruto. At most she could gift him information by touching his forehead. Cause a mild headache. Hey, he said again, grinning. I've got a surprise for you. His head nuzzled into her neck. We're leaving. What? Yeah. Reason why I was so late. I may have had a bit of a fit. King, Queen, Jack, 10, the guards, everyone, they're dead. Gone, in the ground. Because? It was a squeak of a sound, the only word she could utter. 'Cause I killed everyone. She froze, those thoughts turning to dread, then excitement as his lips brushed her ear. Come with me. Her ear leapt into her throat, and stayed there. Who? What? When? Where? Why? 1,000 thoughts blitzed through her head, the small, sane part of her balking at the simple disdain with which he spoke of ending lives. Why? For starters. He raised a hand, fingers sparking. They were going to kill you. 2. I hated them. 3. I hated them, and 4. I really hated them. I aim to make Cadmus and everyone funding it pay, preferably with their lives. How? Did you seriously just ask that? Naruto frowned. I just told you, I killed this whole base for you. As to the names, all I had to do was hack into their database and, that's not what you're asking. She bobbed her head as understanding dawned in his eyes. You want to know how I intend to make them pay. You don't care that I killed them. Another nod. Wheel now, that I can answer. Naruto's grin, once so sunny and warm, turned psychotic. We could burn them, freeze them, chop them into little pieces, drive them insane, And those are just the boring ideas. There could be no other word for it. One moment he looked perfectly happy. The next it was like she was looking into the eyes of a hardened killer, a boy who, to her knowledge, had never once taken a life. Where would we go first? He shrugged. I hear Metropolis is nice this time of year. She flashed a shy, tentative smile at him, ducking her head. Just like that? He balked. You'll come with me? Yes. Her smile made his eyes water. Always. Naruto raised his hand, fingers flexing. Hell the censored yes. Superman found himself thinking more along the lines of hell the censored no. He had no idea what was going on, only that someone, a boy of barely 14 years old, was matching him blow for blow. It wasn't the why that concerned him. It was the how. The boy's skin gleamed an unholy red, a sinister shade of savage scarlet, as they traded punches, each countering, leaving him singe. What was he? What did he want? The kid, and his accomplice, a dark-haired girl, had walked right into the mayor's office and, for lack of a better word, destroyed him. Then they'd done the same to other, high-ranking politicians in the city, butchering them like pigs. By the time he'd realized something was amiss, by the time he'd arrived, dozens were dead. And now the boy was laughing. What's so funny? The boy kept laughing, heedless of his bloodied nose. You just don't get it, do you? At that, the man of steel reluctantly lowered his fist, clenched knuckles loosening as they broke apart. Get what? I ain't your enemy, that doesn't change what you've done. So, you'll do what? Lock us up? Yes, Naruto sighed. I can't die, came the reply, palms spread out in the time-told gesture of a shrug. I'm immortal, idiot. I've got a demon sealed inside of me, and my imagination, remember? So if I were to imagine, say for example that I was 10 times stronger than the current me. Wham! His fist flew forward, a heel palm snapping the caped crusader backwards. The follow-up, a knee to the stomach, sent him sprawling. Naruto stalked after him, whistling a jaunty tune. See? You up the ante, and I raise my own hand. It's a royal flush. Hey, see what I did there, Gak? His brief advantage didn't last, however. In the time that it took for finish that sentence, Superman had already caught his breath. A forearm snapped up, bones shattered as he blocked a punch that would have punched a hole clean through a skyscraper. Even as he realized this, he found himself getting pounded 7 ways to Sunday. Beaten right back into the ground all over again. It doesn't matter how strong you are, you can't win this. A groan rose from the streets of Metropolis. I wonder about that. What? Naruto tilted his head slightly, regarding Superman with thinly veiled amusement. Ace's face was practically apocalyptic now, dark hair lofting around her face as though it were actually alive. Alive and ready to lash out at the one who dared to touch her precious person. Oh, he knew that look. He laughed again, coughing blood. Soups? You really should stop fighting me and get the censored away from there, because things are going to get ugly in 4, 3, 2. Then Ace frowned, her eyes meeting those of Clark Kent. A whisper followed. Pain. And the world flared a blinding white. Superman was losing his mind. There could be no other word for it. For every second that he stared into Ace's eyes, he found himself slipping away. Breaking. Losing more and more ground in the battle for his mind. He wanted to look away, knew that he should, and yet it was impossible. His body refused to obey as the ground melted beneath his feet, the air boiling in his lungs, skin sloughing off his face. Ace. Enough. Just like that, he was free. Superman sagged forwards with a gasp, sweat-soaked body collapsing, limp in the street. Every muscle in his body clamped down, every cell clamoring to recover from what just happened, to repair damage that simply wasn't there, did not exist. It couldn't heal what wasn't there. The shock trauma was purely mental, nothing but time would be able to heal this psychic wound. His stomach heaved, depositing his dinner at their feet in a lurid gray puddle. Don't touch him. A girl's voice hissed at him, vibrating with anger. You're not allowed to touch him. Through bloodshot eyes he blinked, gazing blearily up at the 2 teens, his mind struggling to pick them out amidst the sea of blurred images. The one called Ace was glaring at him, her long hair swaying in some odd unseen breeze, her dark eyes vivid and bright as they locked on his. Behind her Naruto was only just now finding his feet, staggering slightly as he clutched the broken remnants of his face, He was healing slowly, that grievous wound on his face slithering shut, his bones mending, his hand rising. Attack. Instinct filled him, his eyes heating even as the blonde stood. Naruto must have seen him, because he threw himself in front of Ace at the last instant. Knocked her aside, taking the blast full in the chest. To his dismay, the twin lances of energy pierced the momentarily depowered blonde through the chest, skewering him like a pig on a spit. Right in his heart. Time stopped. Naruto stood there, gawping down at the holes in his chest. A small, startled frown creased his face. Well, shit. No, dismay flooded the Kryptonian, filling his veins with ice as the boy toppled backwards. He hadn't meant to kill him, In the next instant, he found himself flattened by a wall of pure hatred. It lasted for all of a moment, his ears bleeding, capillaries bursting, bones bending. And then it was over. Naruto, Ace cried out and turned her attention towards her best, beloved blonde, concern flashing in those eerie orbs. Just like that, the shadows of pain looming over Superman was gone. Lowering a knuckled fist into the broken street, he began to rise. Ace still wasn't looking at him, her attention fixated on the boy's prone form. He'd have to deal with her gently, knock her out, so as not to kill her quickly before she turned her wrath on him again. Right, she was dangerous, he had to take her out, before. He never made it. Not even a single step. A voice sing-songed in his ear. Can't have you hidden my Ace? Someone spun him around, and then all he saw was the light, those angry eyes staring into his. How in the hell was he already up? Atomic Rasengan Mother censored ER. A crimson-clad hand bathed in scarlet streamers hand came up, the pulse of light hitting him full on in the chest. It was pain not unlike something he'd felt before. Compared to kryptonite, it was a very close second. The spiraling sphere slammed into him like a hellfire missile, propelling him across the block in the blink of an eye and into then through an unoccupied building. Even as he got back up, the blonde was on top of him, another of those spheres clenched tight in hand. Odd. Perhaps it was just his imagination, but were they larger than before? Odama Rasengan. Yup. Definitely larger. Those twin blasts took him straight on in the chest. A pair of falling meteors, cratering the street beneath his back, plunging him through concrete and asphalt like a heavenly javelin thrown from on high. Wedged deep between a rock and a hard place, the man of steel lay there, and took a moment. Naruto didn't seem inclined to follow him down into the small canyon he'd crafted, and that was something of a small blessing. The brief reprieve gave him time to think. To plan. It didn't make any sense. Naruto hadn't been throwing around energy blasts during their fight. He'd been a brawler. A fighter. So how was he doing this? He'd claimed it was his imagination that allowed him to perform these wild feats. Was that even possible? He wasn't wearing a suit of any kind, nor was the girl, just regular, everyday clothes. So how, then? Oi, Soups. You're not dead, right? Want a drink, or something? With a grunt, the cape-clad hero shot upright, extricating himself from the fissure and returning to ground level in a burst of super speed. What he found there threw him even further off his game. During his brief absence, a small jungle seemed to inexplicably sprouted in the streets of Metropolis. He found himself floating in the center of it, and there, sitting before him, was Naruto. Like a king on his throne, the blonde lounged on the chair, a flushing Ace curled in his lap. She seemed quite content with the positio, her pale face flushing prettily as curled into him, nuzzling her cheek to his. It was the very definition of puppy love, and it broke his heart to see. For a moment, he simply couldn't bear to bring himself do anything but watch. It actually looked royal. Like a king and queen. They even had crowns. Where in the nine hells had they gotten him? Stupid. Ace was chastising Naruto, fussing over the still mending welts in his chest, welts that had once been complete, open holes. Holes? I thought you died. As he looked on, Naruto laid his head into her shoulder, drawing a pleasant sigh from his goddess. Oi, immortal, remember? Came the grin as he ruffled her hair. Besides, if I left ya, you'd be lonely, right? Hey, I'm not going anywhere. She smiled, a normal smile, Clark thought, the sort you'd see from a girl in love. Then he coughed. Oh, there you are. The king of the jungle finally seemed to notice him, raising a glass in toast. Care for a spot of tea, Governor? It was so silly, so absurd, that the man of steel momentarily found himself at a loss for words. I'm sorry, what? What, the first thing, or this? Both, if you'd please. Red sun radiation. He smiled, lowering a smoldering hand. Mixed with a little internal energy on my part. Not that hard to do once you think of it. Imagination, remember? His shoulders rolled in an easy shrug, and his smile would have been pleasant if not for that hard look in those bright blue eyes. Of course, Kryptonian radiation would work even better, but Wisey, there's a few problems with that. 1. I don't understand how it works. 2. I don't want to kill ya. Earlier, I just wanted to see if I could duke it out with you in a fair fight. But now, well, I've had my fill. What? Sorry, you've probably confused about the jungle. Ace's idea. I just gave her a little boost. I think it's a nice change of scenery, don't you? All kinds of things can hide here. Those eyes danced, flashing with idle mirth and madness. Then, and only then did he begin to understand. They weren't trying to kill him, Lord above. They were playing. The laugh, when it came, was completely unexpected, and on that note, I think we can call it a day. He clapped once and the trees receded, reality returning as the plants and vines writhed away, back from the strange and distant world imagination from which they'd come. I get the feeling you're one of the good guys. I don't kill good people. Why, he managed, frowning, that's it. You're just going to leave. You can understand. Naruto shrugged. We're not the bad guys, here. Sure, we might look like it, but really, think about it. He dropped to his haunches, crouching before the prone hero. Yes, we're going after a rogue organization that experiments on children, for crying out loud. Ain't that censored it? One that conducts inhumane tests, attacks innocents, takes whomever and whatever it wants, all to ensure that the United States remains stronger than anyone else. Yes, we're killers. He rose from the throne, pulling Ace with him by the hand. Yes, we're probably nuttier than a squirrel with a barrel full of acorns. But hey, at least we have a purpose, right? Some direction. You can fight us, if you want. Actually, please do. It's more fun that way. Sayonara. Ace. Exit stage left. Before his very eyes, the duo vanished into smoke. Nara. Galatia heard that word, leagues away in her dreams, and suddenly, she was in pain. Screaming, the girl thrashed upright from the pod that was her bed. Instinctively taking flight the moment she was released from the confines of that chamber. Her dazed, numb mind scrambled for some semblance of sense, finding all but nothingness waiting for her in the black. Pain flared through her as her head smashed into the ceilings, stars bursting before her vision as she accidentally harmed herself. In her instinctive urge to escape the blackness, she lashed it out those near her, small fists striking, cracking, breaking bones. People were shouting at her now, trying to tell her what to do. An endless sorceress of voices to her enhanced hearing, impossible to block out. Someone was trying to hold her down, but she pushed them away, breaking the large man's arms as if they were made of rotten wood. Then the kryptonite-laced baton cracked out, striking her in the stomach. Air left her lungs in an explosive whoosh. Stunned, she crashed to the floor, trapped in the darkness once more. It hurt. Her every cell was united in pain, her young body crying out in agony, seeking solace, finding none. It was always like this. She would wake up for another round of testing, try to escape, and inevitably, would be beaten back into submission. In time, Galatia became aware of the voices. Of someone lifting her, holding her, laying her on a table. Then came the needles. So many needles. She cried softly, whimpering when those krypton-laced tips pierced her skin, injecting her with God's knew what. Tethering something to her forehead, a circlet of some sort, and it hurt even worse. Gala felt the tears come, and she cursed herself for being unable to hold them back. See, I told you, a man's voice insisted, she isn't ready yet. Her powers are unstable, nowhere near her peak. That's irrelevant. A woman said, her words biting and cruel. She's Cadmus property, Dr. Hamilton. She'll be ready when we need her to be. That time is now. You can adjust her all you like once she's complete her mission. She's only 16, there shouldn't even be a mission. Enough. Even she, sightless as she was, cringed at that tone. I won't let all that we've worked for be dismantled by a pair of adolescents and your own misgivings. The Ultimen aren't ready yet. She is. So she goes. That's final. Ah. Now Gala remembered. She knew this place, hated this place. It was where they poked her, cut her, scraped her, hurt her. As if summoned by that very thought, her vision finally cleared. Years of stasis might have nearly left her blind, but now her sight was coming back at long last. She blinked teary eyes, squinting at this horrid white room with its high, vaulted ceilings, her body strapped firmly to the equally hated table, staring up at a mounted mirror overhead. They'd wrapped her body in a small white leotard and declined to cut her hair this time, the flaxen tresses eerily similar, she'd been told, to those of her counterpart. Dr. Emil Hamilton gazed back at her, his bespectacled gaze full of pity. "How are you feeling?" she mumbled, the words slow to come to her. "Daddy, what?" A dark hand turned her face away, forcing her to look into a pair of pitiless eyes. Amanda Waller. Her mind vomited the information, even as she loathed it. The one responsible for her creation. Her very being. "We've woken you early, I admit," he nodded, returning his attention to the table, "but I'm afraid it's necessary. A glower was sent towards Waller. Someone's been killing our operatives and, until recently we didn't know who." A file formed before her, the holographic image displaying a dark-haired girl with intense, dark eyes. "This is Ace," Hamilton told her. "She's a powerful telekinetic, but the serum we've injected you with should, at least in tandem with that circlet, keep her from assaulting your mind." The screen shifted abruptly in front of her, whipping Ace away. Then it brought up a surprising face to her bright eyes. He was grinning like an idiot, pearly white teeth flashing beneath whiskered cheeks, blue eyes, and a matted mop of blonde hair. "Do you recall this boy?" Gala frowns. Yes. She remembers Naruto. They made her fight him, once, during a tour of the facilities. Waller wanted to see who was stronger. And she'd gotten her wish. At 11 years old, Galad pounded him into the ground without breaking a sweat, without even taking a hit. He'd been beaten bloody, but instead of cursing her, he'd just smiled. Then he'd asked her if she wanted to be his friend. She'd been smitten with him ever since. Love. Her mind spat out a line from one of Hamilton's poetry books. "The ones you shouldn't hurt at all. So if I break you, please don't be sad, it's because I love you most of all. He's the one you need to watch out for. He's nearly invincible, heals almost instantaneously. We believe the two of them to be headed to Gotham." Waller butted in. "They're your mission." "What do you want me to do?" A syringe pressed to her throat. "Oh no, not that. Not duh. Kill them." Then the plunger depressed and her world flared a blinding white all over again. Ace was swiftly coming to the conclusion that she didn't like Gotham, not at all. Not one bit. The corruption here disgusted her, but not so much as the Cadmus operatives they'd slain. Naruto had simply walked right up to a building full of them, and, in typical Naruto fashion, he'd gone overboard. The thought warmed in all sorts of awful ways, and she felt herself clutching his hand ever tighter as they faced down yet another foe. That seemed to be happening an awful lot lately, didn't it? Everywhere they went there was resistance, always resistance, they should all just die. For indeed, many just had. Batman blinked, eyes narrowing behind the cowl. Superman had warned him of the pair, but seeing them firsthand, this boy in simple blue jeans and orange shirt, this seemingly harmless girl in her little white dress, he hadn't known what to make of them, until he laid eyes on the building, until he saw the scale, depth, depravity of their work. Words failed him. Nothing could describe what he was looking at, no amount of words or verbs or syllables could vary. "Did you just turn that entire building inside out?" Naruto censored his head aside, grinning from ear to ear as the skyscraper creaked and groaned behind the three of them. "Pretty neat, huh?" He raised a hand, droplets of blood all too slowly sprinkling into his hands. "All those people inside, they've made such a nice smear." "But why?" "They funded Cadmus. Cadmus hurt Ace. So, naturally, they had to die." Ace quietly felt her neck begin to burn in a fierce flush. "Oh, Naruto." "Say, bats," Naruto began, cracking his knuckles. "Have you ever heard of the definition of insanity?" Galatia wanted to weep. Her body moved against her will, her eyes unerringly seeking her target amidst the dark spires of Gotham City. She felt the wind against her face, was cognizant of it tickling her nose, but she could no more lift a finger to brush the hair from her visage than she could bring her body to turn around. She couldn't control herself. Nothing. Nothing at all. Whatever they'd injected her with ruled her, compelled her, controlled. It beat any and all thoughts of resistance into submission, forcing her to obey. The voices told her it was her own fault. Her defiance had forced the serum on her, this ruthless depravity on her soul. She didn't want to fight Naruto, didn't want to hurt him. So now, they were making her. Even now she could feel herself being overridden. The serum control chip forcing her to do exactly as she was told, forcing her to obey Waller's every command. There. She saw the target down there, in the fray, fighting the bat. The lantern. Others. Protocol demanded that she attack, but something held her back. Let him exhaust himself, the order said. Wait until he's weak. So she watched. Waiting for her moment to strike. Minutes earlier. The Joker. The silence that followed Batman's response was almost comical really. One could have heard a pin drop in the deafening void of disbelief. The sheer, gobsmacked look the boy wore very nearly made the Dark Knight smile, or at least as close as he came to it nowadays. Really, the kid's reaction was priceless. It would have been far more enjoyable if he weren't covered in blood. Stomp. A booted foot shot downward with all the force of a falling gavel, the kick overturning a nearby car, sending it spinning like a top. An alarm bleated, only to be silenced by another savage swipe, this one of his hand. The hood of the pickup crunched merrily beneath his palm, dying in a final, belated whine. Fear of spiders is called arachnophobia. Fear of the number 13 is called triskaidekaphobia. Fear of Batman is called common sense. But he'd never had much common sense to begin with now, had he? Extricating a hand from the crumpled hood, he shot the bat a foul look. Ah, that's not fair, Batsy. No fair at all, Naruto whined, his whiskered features scrunching in a childish pout. Joker, I don't even know who that is. I've been locked up in a cell for most of my life. You can't just say, the Joker. Much to Bruce's dismay he actually deepened his voice and feigned an imaginary motion with the long sleeve of his shirt, and trump me like that. It's totally breaking the fourth wall. That's my shtick, Datbayo, and you just stole it. Ace sighed. Naruto, I know you're fond of shattering reality but… Come on, Ace. It's the principle of the matter. A frown followed. Since when does that matter to you? Naruto blinked. It's just, he stole my thunder. I was getting all fired up and everything, then he goes and poof. Blows it out. Just like that. Do you have any idea how annoying that is? Right, Bats? His eyes cut to the Dark Knight in question, imploring. Hasn't that ever happened to you before? Oh, the strong silent type. Right. So, who is the Joker, anyway? Some sorta creepy clown with a suicidal complex? This city does seem to have a lot of those. Ace nodded, her dark hair bobbing from the motion. A small smile plucked at her dark lips. We should kill him. Naruto nodded sagely, folding both arms across the rags that were his shirt. We should. Can we? Then we shall. Blocks away in his hideout, the clown prince of crime sneezed over his plans. A scowl plucked at his pale, pasty face. I get the distinct feeling I've just been mocked. Casting the blueprints for his latest trap aside, he hollered into the next room. Harley, get my mallet. We're going out. Time to play whack-a-bat. A drawling voice swiftly answered him. Whatever you say, Mr. J. Bruce Wayne was trying his level best not to smile. Really, he was. These teenagers, had just openly mocked perhaps the most dangerous psychopath in all of Gotham and uncertainty. Now that they were here and weren't pissing themselves in fear. He had to respect them for their gusto, if nothing else. It was almost a shame, really. If they weren't so hellbent on killing, they might have gotten along. Realizing Naruto well and truly wasn't going to let this go without at least getting some shots in, Ace reluctantly demurred. Just what was it about boys? They always wanted to fight. So, the Joker. Is he at all like that lantern guy we outran? They seem to have a lot of fancy names, these heroes. Right, that guy. Naruto nodded, wrapping an arm around her with a cheery grin of his own. No fun at all. Tried to blast us on our way here. Tried to blast my ace. What kind of jerk does that? All I did was knock over a building or two and zap. He comes out of nowhere and starts shooting. So, like any gentleman, I pranked him. Real hardass, couldn't appreciate the old glue and feathers shtick. Nice ring, though. Wonder what it would be like to have one. Oh, wait, I don't have to wonder. Ace's world suddenly blurred as Naruto spun her around and away from the fray. In the next instant his hand rose between them, barely intercepting an emerald blast of light. The second proved slightly more fortunate, striking him full on, snapping his head back. Only to fizzle out with a dull pop. Oh, hell. A rough voice drawled from the skies. That's not good. Speak of the devil. Naruto lowered his head slowly, stubbornly rubbing at the numb spot on his chin. Shoulda known you'd follow us. So? He raised his gaze, fixing Green Lantern, otherwise known as John Stewart, in his mismatched sights. I'm guessing you want to finish what we started. Unless you're not still made about the glue and feathers. I mean, I'm sure Hawkgirl liked him. Zap. His body rippled like water, the hard light hammer passing harmlessly through him to crunch down on the street. You know that won't work, right? You'll have to make something better than. Oh. Is that a sword? That is a sword. Big sword. He knew, in theory, that the massive cleaver couldn't hurt him, but seeing it firsthand, feeling the fear. Yipe. Solidifying, he backpedaled, a cloud of dust chasing him up the street as the giant hard light construction split the street where he'd been standing a moment before. A thought conjured a sword of his own to a palm, an immutable barrier parrying the overly large weapon with a modicum of effort. Yup. He grunted, a bead of sweat trickling down his forehead, still grouchy. Thought so. Ace, take care of the bat, subdue and suppress. Before Batman could ask what the devil that meant, a small fist plowed into his sternum, sending him skidding backwards in retreat. When he tried to block, he felt his wrist fracture, bone splintering through the suit. It caught him completely by surprise. Even as he defended, it was like being beaten about by Bane. How was this possible? Surprise, surprise. The boy crowed, darting away, Green Lantern in hot pursuit. My imagination can affect others too. Ya know. She's currently thrice as strong as your average bodybuilder. Pretty handy, Ryoof. The words exploded from his chest as a giant glowing fist finally found him, hurling the bewildered blonde into a building. One down. He was allowed no more respite than that as another, faster blow was sent his way, forcing him to dodge again. He tried to rush her from behind, only to grunt and frantically dodge as the deceptively agile teen nearly shattered his ribs with a roundhouse kick. Apparently Ace had been endowed with the knowledge of certain fighting styles as well as the power, and was being disturbingly intelligent with the use of her new skills. She swung again. And a wall of green light was there to greet her. Everything went downhill quickly. Now, Ace didn't consider herself fragile, but she wasn't good at taking hits. Naruto had always been there to buffer them, but to be hit by a beam like that at light speed was painful, to say the least. Unprepared for the sudden attack, she found herself flying, her body skidding harshly against the overturned asphalt, skipping like a thrown stone. Bones broke. Muscle tore. Skin bleed. When at last she finally struck a lamppost, the metal bending around her, Ace was almost grateful. Almost. Until that same post was wrapped around her by the lantern, binding her arms, trapping her. Agony ripped through her in an angry wave, her wounds screaming. No wait, she was screaming, because Green Lantern was pounding Naruto back into the building again, an endless series of beams and blasts and all other contraptions driving him deeper and deeper into the tower. Every time he tried to rise, he was simply struck and buried even further. Stop it, she cried, struggling against her bonds. You're hurting him. Hurting him? John gave her a disbelieving look. Kid, he just killed a building full of people. He'd made the mistake looking in her eyes. Ace glowered, reaching for the threads of his psyche, intent to pluck them. She would crush his mind for this, break him into small pieces. She would. Nothing. Batman stood between her and her prey, the black folds of his cape blocking her line of sight. Had he done it intentionally? Seething, he turned her attention outward, her mind reaching toward the rubble where Naruto had been buried. She willed the rocks to shift, the massive pile of debris to move, the massive building to be lighter, to release her best friend, to give him back. Why are you here? Batman was demanding of the lantern, completely unaware of her subtle works. I didn't ask for help. Thought you could use a hand. John replied. These two are too dangerous for us to take on alone. Ace scoffed and renewed her efforts. A trickle of consciousness bled into hers. A thread of thought stitching itself into the tapestry of her mind. There. Yes. She willed Naruto to get up. Willed her strength back to him. The strength he'd given to her. Pouring her love through him, into him, through their bond, willing, no, demanding that he get back up. And the rubble shifted. Batman scoffed. I had it under control. Did you? In the next instant the metahuman was suddenly there, hovering between the ludicrous lantern and bewildered Bat. Fury. That was all they saw in those angry, blue eyes. His hands lashed out on either side, seizing the two crusaders by the throats. Yank. He hauled them into one another, their skulls slamming together with a dull crack. Once, twice, thrice, then again, and again, and again. Again. You hurt my AC. It was a growl, completely devoid of levity. No one hurts my ace. Naruto. Seeing the anger in those eyes, the tethers of red light licking at him, she called out, struggling within her prison. Calm down, I'm fine, they just broke my arm. I'll be breaking a few of theirs then. Starting with Mr. Flashlight over here. A fist thundered into the former soldier's face, sending him streaking across the sky like a jade meteor. Another drove the former soldier beneath the ground like a splinter, and a third glued him there, binding him to the concrete. A fly on flypaper. Batman struggled upright, only to find himself similarly bound, trapped by the strange substance that bound his ally. Lantern. John raised his arm, preparing to cut them loose. What in the... Only then did he realize, he no longer possessed the ring. His eyes locked upon the little devil, hanging aloft in the air, turning the ring end over end in hand. A mile above it all he balanced on the wind's forward edge, as if he were an orange fleck of the land itself, flung up and sent wheeling by the turbulent air. Hand thingy, X-ray vision and telepathy, he called down at him, sneering. Don't know why I didn't think of it earlier. Let's see here. Just like that, those azure eyes swung back to the ring. No switches, which means it must function on will or something, and that gives me an idea. I like this ring. I really like it. I don't like green, though. Let's do something about that. Scoffing, he hurled the tiny device down to the street. That was when the light came. A veritable cocoon of cascading color consumed him, swallowing him whole, bathing the streets in brilliance. So many colors. He mused from within the maelstrom. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, pink, black, white. So many. So I thought to myself, hey, gray is nice. His silhouette shifted in the radiance, becoming more and more opaque. Solid, real, not light, but not dark. Not crazy, nor sane, either. Balance, you know, just a little tweak and, aha. There we go. With a final keening of the winds the cocoon vanished, leaving the blonde intact, but not unchanged. No, he looked very much like a Green Lantern might, bar the silver, and the symbol. White eyes, hidden now behind a silver mask, looked down to regard himself. Wow. He rumbled. I was just aiming for the ring, looks like I got a bit of an upgrade. Sure enough, there they were, on his chest, on his ring. A faintly glowing inverted octagon set against a backdrop of waving lines, neither set nor deviously distinct. Ace liked it. Neither light or dark. Poetic. That thought faded as a faint, silvery glow enveloped the blonde, a radiant hue overtaking him. Like a silver angel in the night, he drifted towards her, alighting effortlessly at her feet. Just a second, Ace. The ring flared, a pair of twin arms effortlessly extricating her from her cocoon of steel. As ever, when he laid his hand on her she felt all of her aches and pains disappear. A touch was all it took. Broken bones bending, her wounds sliding shut as though they'd never been. When he offered her his hand she accepted, allowing a strong arm to lift her dainty body out of the wreckage. Nice costume. She beamed up at him. Now he really did look like an anger to her. The blonde sputtered. Yeah, the whole disguise really isn't my thing. But hey, at least I got a ring out of the deal. Guess this makes me the first Gray Lantern. Holy hell, that sounds corny. A snicker leapt from his lips and joined hers, giggling softly beside him. Now, his fingers clenched, and the aura expanded, became almost flame-like in its intensity as his imagination boiled fresh power into the ring. Let's test this baby out. Impatient, she felt her master's impatience, and she railed against it like a stubborn child, refusing to capitulate. To give in, to yield, was to destroy everything she'd ever longed for, ever loved. With every fiber of her being, Galatia fought down the urge, the orders to attack, resisting Waller's control. Even now she was flagging, the last of her mental reserves draining themselves dry as she struggled to keep a position in the air, to stay aloft and away from the battle out of sight. No, I can't hurt him. I can't, I won't. Spirits, she didn't want to. Why were they making her do this? What are you waiting for? Attack. Now. The fat woman was shrieking at her, but with all her soul she resisted. Not much longer. She knew it wouldn't last, could feel the numbness of the serum sapping her will, the cold jagged sparks of the chip demanding that her body obey, or be faced with still more pain. No, she wouldn't last much longer. It would happen. Any second now. Soon. Oomph. Breath burst from Batman's lungs as a silver spear slammed into his chest, bodily tossing him across the street. Naruto laughed at the vain attempt to get closer, catching a flung batarang on the shaft of his hard light weapon and sending the explosive back at him a second later. Ace Batman bristled, recalling Clark's message, that warning, only a few hours before. If you do fight him, whatever you do, don't give him time to think. Was this what he'd meant? Absurd as it sounded, if this kid really empowered himself using only his mind and now he had a ring to help him focus well, it wasn't good. Like Amazo, but worse. More. Infinite. He didn't need to copy their powers, he simply created his own, based on his thoughts. If you gave him enough time to think, he would begin to learn, adapt. Clark might have said otherwise, but the boy was dangerous. Naruto felt a wide grin grow on his face. A scarlet streak had something to say about that. Even with his heightened reflexes, Naruto barely saw it, much less Ace. It registered as a sudden pain in his gut, nearly doubling him over. What? Confusion lasted all of an instant before the information came. The sheer volume of information pounded into him, telling him who had struck him. The Flash. Fascinating. My beams are as fast as yours, Speedy. He snapped, raising the ring. Lightspeed. And now my reflexes, ah hell. I'll just show ya. Drawing back, he gathered himself and leapt at what seemed, to everyone's eyes, like nothingness. Dynamic. Entry. THOOM. The Scarlet Speedster grunted in surprise as a boot thundered into his chest with the same force of his own speed, sending him tumbling into the ruins of the destroyed building. A penthouse that the dynamic duo had only just slaughtered their way through a few hours before. The scent of blood filled his nose, the sheer volume of it threatening to make him gag. Oh, God. Through bleary vision he could see Diana and the others, his backup as it were, engaging the blonde. Oh wow. Bruce froze. Impossible. Naruto was getting back up, slightly dazed, but still very much in one piece. He even did a little dance, bouncing on the balls of his feet. You're Wonder Woman, aren't you? He grinned, looking to her eyes very much like an excited child who'd just been told they could stay up past their bedtime. You're supposed to be strong, right? I like fighting strong people. Right, Ace? Behind him his companion offered her shoulders in a mute shrug, deferring to the blonde's wishes. You can fight, if you want, just don't get hurt. Sweet. We've finished up here, might as well have some fun. If it weren't for the bloodstains both of them bore, she might have found the exchange a little amusing. That, and the fact that this body had kept pace with Wally the Flash had her more than a tad worried. She could see him getting back up across the street, but if the boy was really that fast, this might be a good workout. Diana blinked, raising her arms. I suppose. Naruto looked positively giddy. Great. Let's do this. Whatever else he might have said perished as a white blonde meteor slammed into him from on high. Asphalt burst in every direction, splintering outward from the sudden and unexpected crater, the subsequent shockwave launching every being, hero or otherwise, backwards for miles in either direction. At the epicenter of it all, Naruto was already rising, wounds slithering shut as he stumbled to his feet. Ace yelped. Galatia. A blink followed, his mind struggling to reconcile the intruder, this sudden newcomer, with the girl he'd once known. Wah. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice teary in the dust. So sorry, I have to answer to them. I can't stop. Wait, wait, wait. What the hell? This is happening way too fa. That was all he had time to hear before she set upon him. I answer to an authority, she snarled, a heel palm snapping into his chest, as if she were a completely different person. They want you dead, so, die. You say you answer to some sort of authority. He snapped back, slamming her down to the ground. Cadmus, those censor eaters only want me as dead because I'm an embarrassment to the lot of them. She swung up and he blocked, bones crunching even as his heel caromed off her face. Cartilage crunched, muscles ripped as she tore the limb down, severing it at the elbow. Because I do what they can't. His arm swung away, already sprouting a fresh appendage, closing on her face. Squeezing. What kind of authority is that? Doesn't matter. It's their world and they won't stand for you anymore. If it isn't me, it'll just be someone else. Really? With all his will, all his might, Naruto clambered upright, legs scything hers out from beneath. Who do they send after you? Who can they send? The League. They can't stop me. His lunge carried him straight into her arm, clothes lining him savagely. He slammed down into the asphalt, grunting. You call that a punch? He growled, blue eyes flashing, uncaring for the blood trickling down his forehead. He stood woodenly, a puppet severed from its strings. You think that hurt? Like a viper his arm shot out, snaring her wrist. Galatia yelped, finding that her superior's super strength suddenly wasn't so superior or super anymore. Wall. That was her next thought as the human tossed her into a building, steel and concrete yielding like paper before her unexpected retreat. By the time she found her footing, by the time she pushed herself upright on her elbows, he was already there. Blow beat against blow, striking, tearing, swearing. Not at all. It doesn't matter. He stormed after her, swinging when he came closer. It doesn't matter how hard you hit me. His hand crashed into her arm, numbing. Go ahead. Tear off my arms. A knife hand found her neck, paralyzing. I'll kick you. Break my legs. Knee to the solar plexus, smashing the wind out of her lungs. I'll bite you. He ducked as she soared past, his teeth snapping shut around an ankle. Ground. That was her only thought when her nose exploded against the street, red, viscous blood spraying everywhere. Crush my throat. Punch. Pain in her gut. I'll curse you. Another blow, the lick crushing her ribs. It won't hurt. It never will. Because, to me, nothing would hurt more than losing Ace. The last thing she saw was his hand descending mercilessly on her neck on the control chip. Pain flared through her body. She screamed until her voice went hoarse and then. Blackness. By the time Ace finally found Naruto down in that crater, she'd nearly gone mad with worry. Of course, she wasn't entirely sane to begin with, but you got the picture. It certainly didn't help that she'd recognized the one responsible for the shattered street in which she now stumbled. Yes, she'd known at once who was attacking her crush, someone she had no business fighting in any sort of physical altercation. The sheer momentum of their first attack had leveled the street, blasting everyone, her included, away like a leaf in the wind. Galatia. The mere mention of the name made her want to shriek, spit, swear, take someone's head, and tear it off. Not necessarily in that order. Gala, her rival, competition, and, if one wanted to be brutally honest and terrible about it, sister in arms against Cadmus. The one person who probably had just as much reason to hate the organization as they did. The one whom she couldn't hurt because no Naruto wouldn't like that, and if Naruto didn't like it. Well, there's some boundaries even Ace wasn't willing to push, and losing her beloved blonde wasn't one of them. Still, she reasoned to herself, Naruto stood a more than fair chance of defeating someone like her. Galatia was dangerous, yes, perhaps even slightly crazy, but she was no Superman. Yes, she might hit hard, but Naruto had fought Kryptonians before and he knew how to counter that. After all, he had a wealth of power almost literally at his fingertips. All he needed to do was think. Of course he would win. He always won. At least, that had been Ace's rationale. Until she saw the blood. It was just a single mark along the sidewalk trapped within a tattered sleeve, his sleeve. But it set her to sprinting regardless. Naruto. A weak tug answered her clarion call, plucking at the strings of her psyche. Frantic, she followed the bond through the streets, tracing their connection past overturned cars, an eerie-looking series of black flames currently chewing through what looked like the scorched remains of a ruined airplane, before she finally found the source of the destruction. The crater was massive, yawning before like a great abyss and half filled with water from the savage pipelines. She almost thought it went on without end until she saw the light. A tiny flicker in the dark, a bright candle in the black. Clearly he had to be down there, he just had to be, because the alternative meant that he was dead, and if he was dead. THOOM. One final tremor rioted through her feet as the earth shook, the aftershock sending her stumbling into the abscess after it. She slowed herself with a thought, the tips of her feet lightly skimming the ground as she took flight and descended into the dark. Sure enough, the light grew brighter as she approached, until she realized Naruto must have somehow used his powers to conjure it. Sure enough, there he was, crouched over Galatia's prone form. And covered in blood. Terror gripped her in a vice and squeezed hard, turning her very soul pale with fear even as she scrambled down into the hole after him. She made no effort at stealth, and he must have heard her, because he spun like a top the moment she came within arm's length, embracing her before she could slam into his back. Ace squeaked softly as her face met his shoulder, momentarily startled by the overt display of affection. She stood there for a long moment, safe and warm, ensconced in that cocoon of warmth and happiness. Then came the tears. "I was worried, you idiot." They gushed out without warning, overwhelming her self-control and making her blubber like an idiot. Ace hated it. Hated him for making her worry, for making her cry. He undid her in every way. Made her feel as if he had torn open her heart whenever she wasn't with him. But this went beyond even that. She could feel his life force flickering like a tiny candle in the wind. He'd gone almost an entire day without rest. This time his brain was burning from the exhaustion that came with over-exerting himself. "I'm all right." It was the first word out his mouth, and it only made her blubber even louder. "I'm alive." But, your arm, ah." She felt his head bob against her as he turned to look at the still severed limb that had once been his right hand. It had regenerated, she knew, but then it had fallen apart, crumbling like ashes. "Don't worry. I'm just running low on juice right now. It'll heal MMPH. Ace wasn't entirely sure what prompted her to beep him then. Love, fear, perhaps even joy. She didn't know. Only that she did. She did, grabbing him by the face and pulling his mouth down to hers, willing her strength into the flagging battery that was his soul, powering her power and love into him through her lips. It was a surprisingly chaste beep, all things considered, her dark lips simply pressed up against his, holding the conduit of their bond open between them. Until she felt his tongue lick at her lip. Oh. Desire rose within Ace in a heady tide, a warm, pleasant buzz obscuring all thoughts. Her mouth pressed against his harder, instinctively angling to deepen the beep on a soft whimper of surprise. Yes. She felt his hands reach back slowly, tentatively at first, threading themselves through her hair. Yes. Dropping now, to the slender curve of her waist, pulling her closer. Yes. Her soul sang, as her tongue danced with his, as a hand took a hold of her leg, lifting it to curl around him. She'd been pining for this for so long. And it ended all too soon. No, a lifetime of angry, repressed passion danced through her veins as he pulled away, crying out at the sudden closure. Puppy love was all well and good, but for him to leave her hot and bothered like that, it just wasn't fair. Relax, relax. He soothed at her, his tone placating, calming, as his hands stroked small circles on her back. "I'm as happy about this as you were, but..." Ace thought she saw his face color in the wan light afforded by his powers, deepening now as his cheek nuzzled hers. "This isn't the best place for it. No, don't give me that look. We need to wrap things up. Then you can beep me breathless." Her own flush deepened. "I'll be holding you to it." A growl stifled itself in her throat as she drew him closer. Got that? Now that she'd gotten a taste, now that she knew what she'd been missing after that first beep, her hormones were well and truly racing, demanding more. It took everything she had not to knock him down and simply have her way with him right then and there. He grinned. "What did I tell you about talking like a pirate? But pirates are awesome, Ibeo, honestly, just because you read that manga. Thou shalt not diss the piece of one." "Fine, fine. You win." Finally, reluctantly, her lips pulled away. His expression was telling. "I get the feeling you want to ask me something." "So?" she asked, glancing at Galatia's body. Why the blood? I suppose it'd be too much to hope that you killed her. Just like that, the humor drained out of his face. No, in fact, I plan to take her with us. What? It's not what it sounds like. His voice left no room for argument, imagined or otherwise. And don't worry about the blood. Hell, most of this ain't even mine anyway. Then his head jerked to the prone body at their feet still tended by clones. I got what I came here for. Understanding flooded their bond in a rising wave of realization. So that fight, yup. I let her toss me around a bit until I could find this. A bloody palm held up what looked suspiciously like a control chip, and until now I've been busy getting that serum out her bloodstream. Those blasted techies heard what I wanted them to hear too. Which reminds me, he added with an impish smile, you missed a very flattering speech about on my part. I thought it was very poetic. Speech, poetic, and she'd missed it. Oh, here. Let me show you. Nope. She knew that look was nothing good. She tried to draw back, but he held fast. No, there's no need for I insist. Ace sputtered as 2 fingers pushed against her head, hopelessly coloring to the roots of her hair at the memories that followed. What? The love she felt nearly staggered her, the firmness of his resolve. The searing dedication to her that surpassed all else. Even his desire to live. Apparently heedless of her atomic flush, he returned to the task at hand, not once looking back at her. Yup, and instead of watching, listening to our fight or finding a weakness against me for that matter, they basically heard what I the world's most annoying song for the last hour or so. I believe it was something along the lines of It's a Rainin' Men or somesick. Aren't I awesome? Hey, she actually liked that song. Just a little. You. Glorious bastard, those are slanderous claims of a slanderous nature. He attested. Slander is bad. Stop giving me the run around. Can't you just heal her? She asked as he knelt before the prone blonde's body, like you did with me. That was different. The gray lantern sniffed. I knew what the problem was. Where it was. And how to fix it. This is different. It's in her blood and I can't just purge that without consequences. Scorched earth may be my favorite response, but it ain't always the best. So once I've figured it out, there. Gotcha, ya little bugger. His fingers made an odd, bobbing motion. As though they were beckoning to something she couldn't quite see. As though called to him, summoned by that very gesture, a lurid, grayish substance rose from Galatia's open mouth. In the same vein he seemed to be giving her something, what looked a good deal like his own blood, easing the crimson fluid into her even as he extracted the serum polluting her veins. He continued the strange treatment as she looked on, pulling and tugging it away by tiny, small increments. Then a nearby crackle of thunder alerted her to the more immediate threat. What about the lead? Naruto grinned. Oh, they're occupied. Ace finished, sighing. Really, she should have known by now. Yup. So what did you do? Illusions? Clones? A beat of silence passed between them as the blonde worked, and it was telling. Ace didn't need to read his mind to know what he'd done. You used that, didn't you? She accused. Aha. Her finger thrust forward, jabbing sharply against his chest, nearly toppling him over. That's why you're so weak. I told you not to do that without me. To his credit, he managed to look at least a little chagrined at those words. You know how draining it is for you to create something like that without me there to boost you. The blonde's smile was positively beatific, but AC, think of the fun. The subsequent deadpan was barely concealed. You're impossible, you know that? Impossibly, the grin grew. Yes, on both counts. You know you love me. She acquiesced with a slight smile of her own. Actually, yes. Meanwhile, across Gotham, I'm sorry, what the hell just happened? Wally West was confused. No, perhaps confused wasn't quite the right word. Try baffled. Yes, baffled was a better word, because what he was looking at was the very definition of insanity, something that had no business being here in Gotham or anywhere else for that matter. He'd woken to find himself here after that last explosion blasted them apart. Intellectually, he knew he was still well within the city limits, and yet not. Because, there was no feasible way, no matter how hard he tried to rationalize it. That this made any censoring sense. The Star Destroyer loomed over him and the entirety of downtown, casting him its great, angular shadow. As he looked on in apparent disbelief, The vessel spewed countless TIE fighter squadrons, their signature scream echoing on across the city and reverberating up his bones. He knew Naruto and Ace could warp reality, but this was insane. This thing shouldn't even exist. A sizzling buzz hummed into existence as a heavy, modulated breathing took his attention elsewhere. Turning around again and starting to become exceedingly worried at just how easily he was being censored up on from behind, Flash couldn't help but stare when he found himself face to face with two menacing meters of cloaked black armor holding a glowing red beam of light. He couldn't be blamed for the way his mouth dangled. No one could. He was looking at the definitive reason to never disregard an amputee and an iron lung, after all. His eyes locked onto the angrily hissing blade, held by humanity's illustration of a Dark Lord, and the rhythmic sounds of his artificial breaths sent the speedster's heart racing. "You can't be real." When it spoke in reply, he felt that same, ageless fear he'd experienced as a little boy in the movie theater. "I find your lack of faith disturbing." Wait, isn't that the line he used on URK? Before he could process that any further, the Dark Lord raised a hand. Wally had all of an instant to recognize the gesture, then he felt the faintest pressure beginning to build on his throat. Instinctively his hands flew to the vice at his neck, grasping at something that simply wasn't there until... Oh, censored. That was all he had time for before the sweet slumber of sleep took him. John Stewart considered himself a practical man, rational. He knew, on a fundamental level, that certain things could not be explained. Take Superman, for instance. How did you rationalize something like that? No, some aspects of life were best accepted, or, if you couldn't try to accept it, at the very least ignore it. He was a soldier after all, a former sniper. Rationality was what he goddamn did. This, too, was reflected in the way he fought. His mind was a soldier's mind, trained and dedicated to a fault. Perhaps too dedicated. In a world of aliens, superpowers, and all manner of irrationality, he was used to things at least making some semblance of sense. What was happening now was not rational. At all. Not only did it shatter into little tiny pieces, the fourth wall, but it made him wonder if he was going well and truly insane. It galled him to think the boy could just create a ring and a battery from his own imagination, but he'd done just that, mere moments before someone or something had blasted them halfway across the city. Reality had never before been so violated in one day. And now it was about to get worse. Which was why, as he stumbled upright in his own little crushed corner of the city, he couldn't bring himself to understand why the sky was suddenly dark. Granted, it was late, but this pitch-black sky made absolutely no sense at all. Lightning scrawled through pitch-black clouds, etching itself into unfamiliar shapes in the dark edifice of the sky. What in the world? Crackling electricity growing in strength sounded behind his back, to which the lantern whirled around, ring at the ready. The last thing he expected to see was a mouse. More specifically, a giant, pudgy, yellow moue with adorable red circles on its cheeks and a jagged tail that looked like it had been through a crimper. It looked surprisingly menacing for such a cute creature. The former soldier blinked, pinched himself, and when the image failed to dissipate, swore. "You have got to be Kachu." With a cry recognized the world over, that little mouse blasted millions of volts at the stunned human. "Ha!" Shayera roared out a war cry as her crackling mace smashed into the unshielded hull of a TIE fighter for what felt like the umpteenth time, producing little to no effect. What was this thing made of? With another swing she found her luck had changed, finally crushing the hatch to expose the pilot in the censored pit beneath. Another all but ripped the dark helmet away, revealing the smiling face beneath. He snapped off a silly salute at the befuddled Thanagarian. "Osu. Nice try, bye. Now." A grinning Naruto at the controls saluted her for her efforts, and poofed out existence. All right, that was the third time. This was getting reedy. Not a moment later, the craft blew up in her face, but instead of fire and flame, she found herself showered in confetti and feathers, no doubt an intentional shot at her wings. Growling, she shrugged them off, searching for her next target in the seemingly endless wave of fighters. There were dozens of them. Stranger still, they hadn't attacked anything. They just seemed to be circling the city. They were certainly solid enough, at any rate. B.A. Krang. As if to mock that very thought, one of them opened fire, a blast of emerald light smashing the unprepared warrior square in the face. Mercifully the shot was much weakened from the distance and her helm protected her from the worst of it, but alas, at the cost of her once thought impenetrable helmet. This is annoying. She felt her face twitch beneath the ruined mask as she ripped it away. Her face exposed and raging beyond belief, she flung her mace at the approaching vessel, the crackling weapon shearing through its hull without a glance. The blast that followed most certainly not confetti and feathers, and it hurled her to the ground as though she weighed no more than a child. Wings singed, she scrambled upright, sputtering as the fighters came shrieking down at her, and she, without her mace. More of them? Really? Era, I believe you dropped this? Her hand shot up instinctively, catching her beloved weapon before it could strike her in the face. Then she realized who had spoken. She swung about, startled to find she was no longer alone in uptown Gotham. She was looking at, well, she wasn't quite sure what she was looking at, honestly. She was looking at a human woman, and a rather beautiful one at that. Bright eyes shone from a cherubic face, framed by ebon tresses, the curtain of which trailed down a body most mortals would kill for. She wore what looked like a slim blue vest and a long skirt, the latter open at the chest to expose large sensors, leaving little to the imagination. Her aloof manner and equally provocative garb were quite baffling indeed, but what baffled her even more were the lack of weapons. Surely this woman didn't intend to fight her unarmed? Such an idea was foolish, and doomed to failure. I don't suppose you have a name? She ventured. My, such manners in this day and age. The woman blinked, smiling. How quaint. You may call me Nico Robin. Shayera. Well then, Shayera, would you kindly surrender for me? You know I can't do that, she snapped waspishly, clutching her mace. Pity. The newcomer Robin seemed genuinely upset at that. I suppose it was worth a try. In a single, graceful motion, she raised her hands. Mille fleurs. Even as she thought to step forward and refute this claim, she found herself bound. Hands sprouted from nowhere, binding her arms and legs, trapping her wings. Her mace clattered to the ground, uselessly thudding at her feet even as she struggled. What? What sorcery is this? I'm afraid strength such as yours doesn't matter to me, the woman replied with a light smile, bright eyes flashing. Nor does speed. That's why I was created to fight you. It was a true pleasure meeting you, Shayera-san. Goodbye. Something about that casual dismissal of her sent Hawkgirl over the edge. All the pent-up frustration she'd been feeling since this afternoon exploded in one furious, defiant shriek. Damn it. Clutch. Jean-Jeans cringed as Shayera's defeat washed over him, but he refused to let it cripple him, painful as it was. He was a survivor, after all, last of his people, last of his kind. He had fought through much, survived much. He had seen the invaders of his world bested here on Earth, had beaten them back from whence they'd come. Vengeance wrought on the Imperium had given him a solace of sorts, a place to be, to exist, here on Earth. He had resolved to keep his adopted planet safe from every threat, to protect it in place of the home he'd failed to save. Unfortunately, the godlike entity towering before him threatened more than, defied even, that grim realization. He was looking at a squid, if he remembered Earth species correctly. A giant, metallic, robotic squid towering dozens of meters tall, standing on rigid, segmented tentacles that should, by all rights, make it impossible to stand. Yet stand it did, its great red laser carving great gouges into the city. What was this creature? An invader, dropping from the sky? The vanguard of their destruction? When he tried to focus on the strange being, a weighty gaze settled on him instead, making him feel as though he were trapped beneath the mechanical eye of a god. What are you? Its very presence was deafening. He felt weaker just by standing near it. He couldn't bring himself to focus, to think, couldn't. And over that incessant din, came a response. I am sovereign. Superman felt the Martian's psychic agony as a jagged knife in his mind, leaving him wide open to another blow. Wham! A devastating hammer fist smashed into his flank, hurtling him into a skyscraper like a human comet. He'd just enough time to be grateful that its occupants had gone home for the day before the orange-blue terror set upon him yet again, a hurricane of meteor blows battering at his defenses with enough force to pound pavement into rubble. Whomever they were no rookie. They were exceptionally skilled. He was in the fight of his life. Despite Naruto's warning, when Lantern had called, he'd rushed from Metropolis. There had to be something he could do. Something. Anything. Naruto had proved he was at least capable of reason. They might even be able to talk him down. He couldn't just stay in Metropolis, he had to try. But instead of rushing to the rescue as was his wont, he'd run headlong into this very strange man. Said man grinned back at him, looking utterly unfazed as they traded blows capable of crushing buildings to pebbles. Hey, this is fun. He grinned as they broke apart, sweeping a hand through his spiky black hair. I'm really starting to enjoy this. With a supreme effort, Clark Kent picked himself up off the concrete, knuckles dragging slightly against the ground as he struggled to reclaim his footing. His opponent descended after him, bouncing on his feet, looking as though this were all just a great game to him. Perhaps it was. Are you quite sane? Nope, I'm Goku, came the cheery reply. Then again, I'm not real, either. Wait, what? All right, round 2. The Man of Steel found himself in something akin to an out-of-body experience as he watched himself get pounded every which way by this self-confessed buffoon. He felt the pain, felt the force pushing his body in the decreed direction, but in his shock, he couldn't process any of it, much less counter. A punch to his right cheek was immediately followed by one to his left, which flowed into yet another strike to his stomach, and to that a chop to the now exposed back of his neck, summarily sending him to his knees only to be blasted backwards by the merciless kick to his face once there. When he finally caught a punch, he expected some degree of surprise. Instead he grinned, dark eyes dancing. Hey, you're pretty strong. Guess I should get serious too, then. Then his hair turned gold. Clark blanched at the sight of those jade orbs. Now he knew who he was dealing with. Ironically enough, 2 words came to mind. Crap baskets. Diana yelped in pain as a blast of red light glanced her thigh, sending her tumbling back into cover. Until her attacker plowed right through it, forcing her to retreat again. Hera, like the others, she found herself facing an opponent of her own, a strange man with an equally strange sword. Orange hair fluttered behind a red-white mask as they danced their angry little waltz of destruction and death, gleaming, golden eyes glaring out from her within its eerie, horned visage as he tried to cut her to bloody ribbons. Whomever he was frighteningly fast. He'd outpaced her from the moment they'd met the moment she'd tried to make her way back into the city. He, for the massive, gaping hole in his bare, pallid chest clearly identified him as male, had been beating her back towards a darkened corner of the city for some time now, refusing to let her near the center. Stranger still, he seemed almost smug, laughing and tossing one-liners at her whenever she tried to talk. Now she found herself trapped in a war of attrition. Physically she was stronger than him, of that much she was certain, but the speedy little bugger refused to stay still long enough for her to land a telling blow. Then, to her dismay, he suddenly stopped. His head censored it aside, as though listening to an unseen voice. Time's up. He raised his hands into the air portentously, still clutching that eerie black blade in a 2-handed grip. Getsuga. Diana gawped, nearly floored by the subsequent pressing pushing down around her. By the gods, the Amazon blanched at the sea of dark red fire swarming towards her, a veritable fire that blotted out her world and swallowed her whole. Tenshou. Wakey wakey Batsy. Bruce groaned as a gloved hand patted his cheek none too gently, painfully jerking him back to consciousness. At first he thought it was the Joker, that the mad clown had somehow taken advantage of the chaos into the city to capture him, or worse. No such luck. As the world came back to him he saw a pair of familiar blue eyes, framed by that new gray mask. Likewise he was bound, his arms and legs trapped in gray light construct, a full body shackle that prevented him from reaching his tool belt or anything else. Oh, he still had a last mini batarang secreted in his hand, but that, sadly, was the limit of his arsenal at the moment. He was trapped, and he knew it. Oi, Bats, the blonde's voice came on again. You awake, or do I have to play with you, do? He glowered, cowl jerking upright. Naruto's smiling face swung into view, looking as though he'd just won the lottery. There we go, that wasn't so bad now, was it? Now, are you going to be a good boy, or do I have to keep you locked up? When only Silenced answered him, he shrugged and released the bindings. Congratulations, you just got your parole. Rubbing at his wrists, the defender of Gotham risked a leer at the boy. He could clearly attack now, but something about his behavior held him back. It was different, odd, even off. What, you don't have anything for me? Nope. The Dark Knight's deadpan was barely concealed, his guard refusing to lower. Why? Maybe because I respect you. Naruto shrugged. That's why I didn't create anything to face you. Oh, I could've. It would have been easy to do, too. I just didn't feel like it. Create. Hehehehe. The teen snickered, taking a seat beside him. You know, I really should thank ya. Really. When we first broke out, I wasn't entirely sure if I'd be able to protect my ace. Now, he glanced down at the silver ring that sheathed his finger. Now I know I can. I've learned a lot in between fighting you guys. And not just in technique, either. For example, have you ever heard of Dragon Ball? Nope. How about Bleach? Nope again. Mass Effect. One Piece. Fine then, here's an easy one. Star Wars. Aha. He must have seen the slight twitch beneath that tight scowl, because the blonde immediately called him on it. See, with my ability, I had plenty of time to learn all about the entertainment industry. So I read a few minds, dove through a bit of manga, speed played some games. It was fun. His words trailed off into a bemused laugh as a batarang passed harmlessly through his chest. See, he griped, staring down at the shimmering hole. Now why would you do that? We were having a bonding moment. Reluctantly, the caped crusader lowered his hand. You're not real, are you? Yeah, I'm just a copy. The gray lantern bobbed its head happily, body shimmering from the supposedly final blow. I'll dissipate once the boss wraps up. Although, that masked head tilted aside, I guess you could say he's doing that right now. But yeah, me, created for the sole purpose of speaking with you. Ain't that awesome? No one to fight. No warped reality worlds. He's made one for Flash, Lantern, Hawkgirl, that Martian of yours, Wonder Woman, and I mean seriously what a wonder she is, and of course, Soups, just in case he tries to interfere. Creating someone to fight each of them, preying on their weaknesses. But not you. And I'm sure you're wondering why. Honestly, I could only think of one thing to hit you with after reading your mind, Bruce. One thing that would really affect you. Remember the theater? At the latter's flinch, he nodded, ragged tresses bobbing from the motion. See? We're not so different after all. There are some lines even I won't cross. You lost your folks. I don't want to lose Ace. So let's call it even. You guys brought your best. I didn't. Here's what I'm going to do. I will leave in the next 30 seconds, and for that duration you won't follow. After that, it's open season. Come at me. Bring your best. It'll be fun. 30 seconds isn't a lot of time, Batman replied. We will catch you. For me, 30 seconds is an eternity, came the cryptic reply. So, we have a deal? If not, I could always. Yes. He agreed quickly, not willing to risk giving the blonde another chance to think up new and inventive ways to torment them. Another shimmer folded across the doppelganger, his body rippling like water. Great. Always knew you were the brains of the operation. Naruto offered a wet cough, and reality shifted. Bruce blinked, alarmed to find that he was standing in the center of a massive crater, as was Naruto. The real Naruto, with a small body slung over his shoulder, resting comfortably. And there was Ace. You? The moment she saw him, he felt her in his head. Psyche stabbing at him, and it would have kept at it, had Naruto not laid a hand to her shoulder. Leave him. We're done here. He snapped off a sloppy salute. See you later, Bats. I think I'm going to pay your little rogues gallery a visit. Well, it's been fun. Before he could get another word in, the boy vanished. Taking much of his pride with him. In the end, the Dark Knight was left standing there, mouth hanging agape. Not only had this runt managed to warp reality, but he'd defeated them. The League. Almost single-handedly laid waste to Earth's mightiest heroes. And the entire time, he'd just been playing. If he were ever to become serious, to fight for real. The world itself would end. The Justice League had been defeated. Decimated. They had, Batman realized, nearly every one of them, been beaten, battered and bruised. Superman currently occupied a cot in the Medbay. Jean was still recovering from what he could only describe as a psychic onslaught upon his mind. Flash kept gibbering about Star Wars, which made no sense at all. Hawkgirl had a broken spine. Diana wasn't talking, but he knew the signs. Her opponent must have been a man. Otherwise she would not have been too tight-lipped at such a horrendous defeat. But out of all them, it was Lantern who had suffered the most, mentally and physically. His body wreathed in electrical burns and worse. There were no powers there to help him. His ring had been destroyed during his own battle. Until he received another, he wouldn't be going anywhere. Yes, they'd lost. To 2 teenagers? God, this night was really starting to give him a migraine. This is unacceptable. His head tilted towards the voice as it resonated through the watchtower. Wonder Woman stalked up to him, looking as bad as he felt. He acknowledged her with a curt nod, unwilling to risk words. Within good reason, the woman radiated wrath, feelings of doom leaking from her like a cracked sieve. She was the only other one capable of walking at present, and she wasn't happy. How could we have lost to illusions? She demanded to know, grabbing the rail beside him with enough force to warp the steel. We are not that weak. Ah. So that was the problem, Bruce realized. Her pride, it was in tatters. They weren't illusions. He answered. What? She blinked. They had to be. I've never seen such creatures before. Even the gods. The bruises on Superman's body are real, so are Lantern's burns. He didn't have to mention Hawkgirl, they both cringed at the memory. I don't know how, but somehow he's able to warp reality. To create things that should never have existed in our world. In this case, he recreated popular icons of fiction and breathed life into them. He knew our weaknesses, learned them, and used them against us. But he has weaknesses, too. He held up a small vial of blood, collected from the streets of Gotham. And for all his powers, he still bleeds like a normal man. Those keen eyes snapped back towards him. It's black. Exactly. I'm thinking this could be the key to figuring out what he is. How so? Think about it. Superman fought someone with ridiculous physical strength in Gotham. Flash faced an opponent capable of negating his speed by using telekinesis. Lantern's ring was overloaded and destroyed by pure energy. You already know the story with Hawkgirl and Jean. She was immobilized, and he, mentally assaulted. The Dark Knight paused, considering. What did you encounter? Her lips went thin. I don't want to talk about it. It might help I said no, Diana. Before his eyes the slow flushing of her face looked almost atomic. A thick shade of red coloring her cheeks despite the Amazon's best efforts. Fine, it was a man in a white mask with orange hair, she huffed, looking away. He wore black garments and was possessed of incredible speed. His sword spat flames capable of damaging even me. His mask blasted some strange sort of red light. I wasn't able to deflect that, either. Batman frowned, thumbing his chin. That sounds like Ichigo. Who? A popular manga character in Japan. He turned and sat a nearby console, activating it. You wouldn't know him. By rights, he shouldn't even exist. Just like our friend here. The difference is, he wasn't spawned from a piece of fiction. He's as real as you or I. She frowned slightly when he didn't look at her, no doubt curious as to what he was doing with that DNA sample. That device there, it was a microscope, wasn't it? What was he doing with it? Other questions abounded as well. Manga. Comics. He clarified, inspecting the screen, adjusting the device. Oh. You mean those strips of paper with images? You read that nonsense? I dabble. He wasn't about to admit he only knew about it because Naruto had left a substantial collection of manga behind during his retreat. That was just odd. As if the boy were openly taunting him by flaunting the knowledge of his repertoire from a distance. No, he was probably overthinking it. Diana planted a hand on her hip. Sorcery, she spat the very word as if it were foul. He's a magician, then, like Faust. So is the girl. No, The Amazon audibly groaned and shook her head, the motion sending her ebon hair thrashing from side to side in agitation. Now you're not making any sense. If not magic, then what? Telepaths? She leaned a bit over his shoulder, trying to understand what he was trying to tell her, and only finding herself even more confused. The girl might be, but not him. He wheeled the chair aside, allowing her to come closer. He's different, look. She did, gazing at the microscope, then its image, amplified by the computer. Needless to say, she was baffled. What am I seeing? His blood cells. They're different. Too many protein strands. Too many cells. See that red energy there? It's saturating them, multiplying them, destroying them, making even more. Like a small factory, an endless cycle. Diana didn't like the way he'd said that. It sounded ominous. Maybe this is why he's able to regenerate. Each cell has a life of its own. What does this mean? Other than being hard to kill? I don't know. Bruce hated to admit it, but he didn't. I need to run more tests. I'm going to find him. Well, that was unexpected. Alone? He spun around, leaping out of the chair after her. You won't stand a chance. After what they did to Shayera, I have to try. What are you doing? His hand locked around her wrist. She jerked back as if she'd been scalded. Something flashed in those bright eyes, something vulnerable, but it was gone almost before he recognized it. In that instant Diana could have broken him 7 ways to Sunday, but she didn't. Wait. Was she blushing? No, that was preposterous. Amazons didn't blush. Let go. You can't think of them as ordinary opponents. And you can't treat them rationally, he argued, refusing to relinquish his hold on her wrist. Ace can break you with a glance. Naruto doesn't even need to see you to do what he did to Clark. Everything we've learned up until now is because they've shown us. They're just kids. They were playing with us, Diana. Toying with us. He said so himself. If what he said about his imagination is true, and I'm not saying it is, I'd be willing to bet we haven't even seen the tip of the iceberg here. If you provoke them without knowing how to stop them. She jerked free of his grasp, but the purpose had fled from her. Then what should I do? Diana, she paused. You're not the only one hurting here. Remember that. Let the others recover. When we confront them, and there will be a when, we'll do it on our terms. Not theirs. Yes, she faltered, looking slightly sheepish. I know. I am simply unaccustomed to losing in such a fashion. I feel so helpless. You should get some sleep. I'll take first watch. She muttered something that sounded like an assent and clambered away. Bruce didn't return his attention to the console until he was certain the elevator had departed. Strange. He found himself wanting to follow her and make certain she was all right. He was slipping. Yes, sleep sounded like an excellent idea right about now, but there would be no rest for him. Not until he'd gotten a handle on this. Still. Who knew what those little devils were up to now? Little did he knew that said devil was much closer than he thought. You're a bastard. Shayera grumbled at him, her voice barely more than a whisper in the medbay. You know that, right? Who, me? He grinned cheekily. I am but a humble eater of ramen. Yes, you broke my spine. It was meant to be a shout, but emerged as little more than a dry rasp. How did you get here, anyway? More than anything else, she wanted to reach up and smack him, but the cold mental bindings against her wrists prevented her arms from doing anything more than twitching. Naruto hummed softly, shifting those arms, and then her legs into a ridiculous position despite her vehement, if slightly muted protests. Ah, the benefits of a sound dampener. Well, Batsy was foolish enough to take a sample of my blood up here. Now he knows the secret of my regeneration, but it's probably never occurred to him that I can do more with it. After all, each and every cell has a life of its own. Did he ever consider that those cells might be conscious? Cadmus did some terrible things to me and Ace with their experiments, but they were useful things, too. Did you ever consider that my cells, they might be programmed to, I don't know, form a body when they get too far from the source? Horror dawned on her unmasked face. You're a... Yup. The doppelganger grinned cheekily. I'm just a clone. I won't last long, though. I was going to say monster, but that's close enough, she growled. You wound this humble idiot with your words. The copy deadpanned back, blue eyes becoming angry slits. You know, if I wasn't a nice guy, I could take my frustration out on your friends. Those eerie orbs left hers and roamed towards to Superman, Jean, Lantern, and Flash, still out cold on the cots opposite her. Unable to move, unable to defend themselves from attack. Her heart went cold. Why you wouldn't? The man of steel. Humming softly, he stalked forward at the still Kryptonian. Not so steely now. Wonder how much pain he can take. Don't. It would be so simple, he mused, now approaching the Martian's prone form. I could snap his neck and kill him before he ever woke up. A hand ghosted across his skull, drawing a pained groan from his victim from where he lay. Huh. Sovereign really messed him up. Note to self, don't use Reapers again. Too risky. Perhaps killing him would be a mercy, now. Stop. She strained against his telekinetic hold, trying to grab her mace with her good arm, to no avail. I'm warning you. If you touch them all. You'll what? A blue eye appeared over his shoulder, that single glance conveying more scorn than humanly possible. Curse me? Please. You. The Flash, too. Ignoring her desperate cries, he strode towards the scarlet speedster, pacing away from the still-living alien to regard Wally. The fastest man alive, trapped in a nightmare of his own making, unable to run away. You know I'm more than strong enough to break him. I'm begging you. He made it to the third cot, her pleas caroming harmlessly off his uncaring visage. Lantern's powerless without that precious ring, so he wouldn't even be able to fight back. The man you secretly adore. Wouldn't that be an untimely end? For him to die in his sleep, without ever knowing. Her heart, still pounding, now threatened to leap out of her chest. Naruto, please. He laughed, dropping the dark facade as easily as one would draw breath. Oh, relax. I'm not going to hurt anyone. I just wanted to prove my point. Shayera gasped, feeling as though an invisible weight had dropped off her shoulders. Then she seethed. He'd made a fool of her. What? I really came up here to make sure you were all right, he confessed. See, I'm a bit of a guilty person, and my clones share that sentiment. There. He laid a hand upon John's forehead, his fingertips stemming with a gentle green glow. That should help speed things along. Wouldn't want him losing his mind. Oh, that is interesting. Shayera lifted her head. What is? Someone's poking around in his head's the clone. Boy sounded almost amused, his voice distant as his hand roved over the Martian's skull. Flash and Lantern, too. Even Superman. Calls himself Dr. Destiny. Wow. Corny, much. That's some dangerous telepathy, there though. Trapping people in their dreams like that while they sleep, killing them. What? The word exploded from her in a shout. Oh wow, don't shout, TTEBAO. Came the muffled reply. It's not easy, muffling you when you're that loud. New, too. The clone confirmed, that glazed look in his eye deepening. He's just gotten his powers, and it seems he knows how to use them. I'd better nip him in the bud before he becomes a problem for me. That'll be two you owe me, now. Let's give AC a call though, just to be safe. Then we can get down to business. Before she could ask what on earth he meant by that, the clone went rigid. Miles away, in a distant, secluded warehouse, at long last, John D. Dr. Destiny, he reminded himself would have vengeance. The Justice League had been much too busy with a strange new threat to deal with something so mundane as a prison break on strikers. Which of course gave him plenty of time to put his plan into action. Having been used as a human test subject for a device called the Materiopticon, a device gave people temporary, especially after so long. He'd known at once the device was exactly what he needed. Get revenge on the Justice League. He'd been dreaming of this day for so long now, and Justice Ha was only a few thoughts away. After all, this was all their fault. If they hadn't raided that warehouse, none of this would have happened. If they'd never have found him smuggling those weapons for Luthor, he'd never be locked up, never denied parole, his wife wouldn't have left him for some two-bit hick mechanic. Never have forced him to this. Forced him to take advantage of the riot. Kill the doc, crank the device at max power. Perhaps it could be said that John D. was insane, that his inability to accept the consequences of his own actions had led him to this moment. Regardless, his misguided ambitions nearly cost him his life. It had been the worst pain he'd ever experienced, thunderbolts of brilliant agony lighting up his brain. He wasn't sure how long he lingered there, on death's doorstep, but somehow, he survived. Survived and emerged the better for his reckless endeavor. Awakened to discover with great delight his new gifts. From there it had been child's play. His wife had already paid for her treachery, trapped in a never-ending nightmare from which she would never wake. Death would be her only escape. And with his newly ill-begotten powers, he decided it was the perfect time to strike at those who had ruined him. It was, well, easy. Almost too easy. Superman, Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, even the damn Martian, all now trapped in their worst nightmares. The sheer agony of which would eventually kill them. Of course, Batman and Hawkgirl were still awake, but it was only a matter of time before they. Before what, I wonder? Dr. Destiny started as an invisible hand clamped around the stronghold of his mind and shattered it to pieces. In an instant his attention was flung outward, forcibly returned to the material plane, his psychic hold on the League broken. He was looking at a boy and a girl, she garbed in a battered white sundress and he in an orange shirt and faded black jeans were those bloodstains? How did you get here? He demanded to know. Oh, that was easy. The blonde hummed. My clone traced your psychic link and contacted me. From there, it was child's play for us, right, Ace? Can we kill him, already? His companion sighed, her head rising from its place on the boy's shoulder. I was just starting to kick your ass at Mortal Kombat. Libel, he cried. I owned you at Mario Kart. 'Cause you cheated, came the deadpan reply. You can't cheat in a fighting game. More slander. Goku kicked your butt. He loves to fight. Of course he'd excel in that. John took the opportunity to observe the duo as they bickered. The girl, she was easy to read. A powerful telepath, one who regarded him with open contempt, her dark eyes judging him and finding him wanting. Utterly beneath her notice. The boy, he was different. Those blue eyes noticed him almost immediately, locking upon him as though he were the cat and he a mere mouse. Somehow, that gaze was even worse than the girl's. Like looking into the eyes of an alpha predator, and realizing you were hopelessly, woefully outmatched. A sudden urge to flee filled him. You? Who are you? He demanded to know. Judge, jury, and executioner. Ace answered. That's all you need to know. Oh, Acey, you say the most wonderful things. Naruto cooed, stroking her chin. Couldn't have gotten a better response if I tried. You want to do the honors? The girl preened at her boyfriend's praise. Gladly. John bristled. Idiots. If you're here to kill me, I'll trap you, too. You'll never escape. The moment he made the mistake of looking into her eyes, he was lost. Ace scoffed, her dark pupils glowing in eerily gold. Naruto cackled, his own flashing red. You think dreams are scary? You think reality's censored? You idiot, we eat that shit for breakfast? Naruto's clone loosened up moments later in the watchtower. Ooh, close one. It shuddered. He almost had the boss, there. He had to completely destroy his mind before he went nuts. Shayera felt herself bristle beneath that stare. Why are you doing this? The real reason, not the excuse. I told you, I'm a guilty guy, sis. He unclenched a fist, revealing a newly created green lantern ring for John. Humming softly, he slipped it onto the man's finger. You haven't tried to seriously hurt any of my precious people, so I don't see why I have to destroy you like I did that poor John D. As to the spine bit, well, it really wasn't me. Technically it was Nico Robin, a character of One Piece, whom I breathed life into. She's always been a tad excessive. You're impossible. He shrugged. Honestly, I think you got off easily dealing with her, really. I mean, you could have fought that guy. What guy? The blonde pointed at the new scene unfolding before their very eyes. I what? How are you doing that? Censored you, that how? Seriously? Sorry, knee-jerk reaction, anyhow, just watch. Guess you'd rather deal with me. Then? Her hand shot up instinctively, catching her beloved weapon before it could strike her in the face. Then she realized who had spoken. She swung about, startled to find she was no longer alone in uptown Gotham. She was looking at, well, she wasn't quite sure what she was looking at, honestly. Green hair and one eye, the other blinded by a scar. His green hair and equally green garb were quite baffling indeed, but what baffled her even more were the swords. She knew of such things, of course, but why did have three of them, one in each hand, and what was he doing with the third? I don't suppose you have a name? She ventured. Zoro. Your name doesn't matter to me, the man replied with a gravelly grunt, placing the third sword in his mouth, teeth tightly gripping its hilt. I'm just here to fight. Try not to disappoint me before I cut you. Something about his casual dismissal of her sent her over the edge. All the pent-up frustration she'd been feeling since this afternoon exploded in one furious, defiant shriek. And was cut down almost immediately. Shayera gulped as the warped reality faded. See? The teen grinned. You may have a broken spine, but they fix that sort of shit all the time, I think. Worst case scenario, I'll fix it myself. Shayera blinked, stunned by his words, but only if you promise to be my big sister. What? You heard me. His grin was telling as he climbed onto the bed, his legs swinging merrily to and fro. I always wanted a big sister. Gala doesn't count because she's basically the same age as me, just accelerated. Ace, well, I love her and she's my girl, so that doesn't count, either. Sides, let's face it, you and Diana are badass. So? What'd you say? That's blackmail. It is. Why you hey, better alive than dead, says I. And now we're out of time, goodbye. The Thanagarian balked, suddenly realizing she'd been left in the medbay, her paralyzed body posed in a very interesting position. Fury blotched her tan face. When I get out of here you are so dead, of course. Lantern chose that moment to wake up. What in the world is going on? Back in Gotham, the Joker was very much wondering the same thing. He was wondering who the devil had broken into his hideout and ruined all his lovely plans. One moment he'd been poring over them, the next a giant hand, I shit you not, came flying through the wall, depositing what looked a great deal like that kid from the news feeds right in his abode. The Joker gulped as Naruto none too subtly shouldered the giant brass mallet. It was an impossibly large weapon, something someone of his size should have no business holding, let alone swinging. Yet the teenager hoisted the massive bludgeon it as though it were no more than a feather. Yup. Power levels were indeed bullshit, it seemed. More so the fact that the insatiable blonde had simply appeared as if from nowhere and everywhere. Strange, the kid reminded him of the Lantern fellow, but his ring was no green, it was gray. I seem to recall you saying something about playing whack-a-bat. Personally though, his grin was decidedly wolfish as he hefted the hammer. I'd rather play whack-a-clown. A deafening crack sounded as he struck down at the floor, rendering a nearby oil drum little more than a flattened tin can. That wasn't supposed to happen. Said clown turned even paler than usual when the kid somehow summoned another hammer from nowhere. Well, and here I thought I was crazy, you might be. The blonde shrugged. Would you be willing to listen to an offer of mine? Not really, no, considering you've got that big honking hammer. Naruto's smile turned devious. Then start running, clown boy. Galatia woke with a jolt of fear, screaming from her sleep. Naruto, she cried, no, I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. Fear and sensation came back to her all at once, her body thrashing, screaming as she struggled out of the sheets and the nightmare that bound her. Cold sweat slicked her body through the leotard weight. There was no leotard. She felt the soft caress of silk sheets against her bare body instead. Naked. She was naked, and she felt as though someone had run her over with a train. If she recalled correctly, someone had smacked her with a railcar. Oh no, she hadn't, did she? Reality came rushing back. What have I done? Dread gripped her heart in an icy vice, strangling all sense, all reason, all logic. Memories crashed down on her like a frigid wave. The fight. The brawl. How perilously close they'd come to death. She'd been moments a mere heartbeat away from ending everything. And yet somehow, despite that, she was alive. There was a terrible pain somewhere in the back of her neck and she'd a terrible migraine, but she was alive. The scar upon her temple stood in stark contrast to what she remembered. It certainly hadn't been there before, but her reflection didn't lie. She both looked and felt like absolute hell. The black eye didn't help. Whomever was responsible for leaving her in such a sorry state, they'd at least left a robe on the bed to preserve her modesty. Snatching it up, she hurriedly threw the dark red garment on and cinched it tight about her waist. Gentle warmth enfolded her almost immediately, soothing her crippling aches and pains in equal measure. What kind of robe was this? Clothes weren't supposed to heal you. Alas, no one was present to answer that question, and the poor clone found she'd been left to fend for herself. In the end, left to her own devices and unable to stand the suffocating emptiness of the room, she left it altogether. The first thing she noticed was the floor. It was warm and heated and it felt absolutely wonderful against her bare feet. Whomever had built or imagined it was clearly a master of structural design, all spiraling columns, vaunted ceilings and subtle arches. Her only flaw was the color. The entire building was a hideous shade of raw, bright orange, right down to doorknobs. Still, it was a very large building, seemingly with its own staff included, none of whom gave the battered blonde so much as a passing glance. If they were at all aware of her, they did precious little to show it, as if she simply didn't exist to them. I see the young lady is finally awake, I stand corrected. Galatia yelped and spun around with a start, throwing a punch at the one who'd accosted her. Instead, her clenched fingers slammed headlong an open palm, Her strike stopped cold as she gazed up at the one who had spoken. She found herself face to face with a rather devilish-looking man with dark hair and eerie red eyes, wearing a black suit and tie. He looked every bit the stereotypical manservant one might find in a high-class mansion of some sort. So why was he looking at her like that? Greetings. The butler inclined his head politely. My name is Jeeves. I have been tasked with escorting you to the young master. Gala balked. Sebastian? Quite. The butler replied, sniffing. The master created and brought me here for the express purpose of seeing to your well-being. A lengthy pause followed as his gaze swept up and down over her, apparently finding her wanting. He also asked that I bring you to him upon your awakening. Although, those dark eyes narrowed, you ought to acquire something proper to wear, first. Despite her injuries, the blonde bristled. Hey, it's not like I had anything else to wear. Be that as it may, Jeeves frowned. I'm afraid I must insist. Half a beat, and just what are you going? The butler snapped his fingers. To do. Gala's words trailed off into a quiet squeak as her robe vanished in a swirl of light, replaced by simplest clothes she'd ever worn in her life. The thick garment she'd once worn had given way to a simple pair of blue jeans and a chest-hugging white tee, just enough to expose her midriff, but not to the point of sheer indecency. She even had shoes, well, sandals really, but still. Balking, she rounded on the devilish butler, sputtering madly, trying to find words that simply refused to come. What? How did you do that? Sebastian offered a small smile. The young master gifted me with many useful abilities. The better that I might perform the duties of one of my station. He replied vaguely, rubbing two gloved digits together. I suppose this is a more base usage of them, but needs must. Now, let us be off forthwith. For a fleeting super-powered teen honestly considered questioning him further, but the gleam in those eerie red eyes rooted her. Somehow, she had the distinct sense that this butler wasn't far from whom he pretended to be. After all, he caught her punch like it was nothing. Did she really want to fight him? All right, she relented, sighing, but who is forthwith? Hey. In the span of only a few seconds, the Kryptonian clone found herself ushered down a long hall, up 3 successive flights of stairs, down another flight which made absolutely no sense at all before being crammed into an elevator followed by another elevator that dropped so fast she physically felt her stomach trying to crawl out her throat, and not from sheer anxiety either. The entire time, her escort didn't utter so much as a word. Unperturbed by the ride, or simply accustomed to it, perhaps. Thus, when they stopped before a worn-looking door she was thoroughly and completely disoriented. Where are we? Here. Sebastian retorted primly, somewhere outside of the space-time continuum. That doesn't help, I know. In the end, she didn't have time to answer, because someone was behind the door. Several someones judging by what her superior hearing detected. What do you mean they won't disappear on their own? A girl's voice demanded from just beyond the wooden frame. Well, Sovereign was so big he eventually faded on his own, but the others, I guess the universe doesn't like peas mixed with its porridge. That just means ah-ha-ha. Gotcha again. A harsh crack followed those words, followed by a startled cry on the girl's part. Stop cheating, you. And can't you just, send them back? Wah. I gave them life. I can't just wipe them out like that, aha. Bingo, eat Koopa shell. Hey. Where did you even come from? She shouted. How did you get ahead of me? I am the rocks of the eternal shore. Crash against me and be broken. Gah. No fair. Don't be shy, off you go. Whatever else he might have said died as Sebastian gave Gala a gentle nudge from behind, sending her stumbling through the door and into the room. To her dismay the door itself opened as she crashed into it, shards of light stabbing into her retina, momentarily blinding in their brilliance. Silence fell. Galatia was looking at, well, she didn't know what she was looking at. Naruto and Ace were nestled together in the furthest corner of the room, the latter snuggling contentedly in the former's lap. That was mind-boggling enough. Add to that they were also simultaneously gazing at a flat-screen television and playing a rather battered-looking Wii. That would have been all well and good if they weren't surrounded by a menagerie of strange figures she didn't recognize. But even that glancing realization didn't stand up to the knowledge that they were here, that her family was right here sitting only a few feet away. They weren't shouting at her, weren't condemning her. If anything, the silence was even more worrying. No one shouted at her, no one told her to get out. No one condemned her for her previous actions. They just stood there. Well, most of them. Naruto just seemed, well, amused. Ace, always hard to read, that one. What are you playing? A stupid question to be sure, after finally coming out of a week-long coma, but it was the first thing she could think to ask. Naruto and Ace didn't demand to know why she was awake, or even how, they simply smiled. Well, Naruto smiled. Ace glowered. Nevertheless, Naruto raised a controller, waving it happily. Tears gathered in the corners of her eyes and she fought them down with a small sob, desperately biting her lip like to control her outburst. Not one of pain or sorrow but joy. Confusion as well, but mostly joy. Her heart gave a small lurch at what happened next. Mario Kart, what else? The reality-bending blonde beamed at her, answering her question with a cheery grin. Wanna play? You look like you could use some fun. You're not mad. Why would I be mad? Her words actually got a bit of a blink out of him. You're here. You're alive. That's what matters. The past is the past, ya know. Oh, stop fussing. Ace scoffed suddenly, dark eyes regarding her with a hint of bemusement. Guilt doesn't look good on you. Galatia didn't move, she dare not. Because if this was a dream, if it was all false and if she was in fact still sleeping, this would be an awful time to wake up. She might still be in a coma, for all she knew. Unable to see, unable to move, unless she wasn't. Naruto truly was a wild card in every sense of the word. Wild, silly, utterly unpredictable, hard-headed and stubborn to a fault. But he was her knucklehead and he was looking at her, smiling at her, talking to her, just like old times. Why are y'all looking at me like that? Naruto laughed. You look like you've seen a ghost. Self-loathing smothered Gala's weak smile like a wet blanket. I missed you. The words tumbled out of her, could think to hold them back, and she felt her face burn anew. Stupid, 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 stupid. Where did she get off saying things like this? As if she had any claim to him after what she'd done. She didn't deserve him, wasn't worthy of him, not his friendship, not his feelings, and certainly not his love. She was just a copy, a clone, a broken doll who'd been used up, twisted around and sicked on him like an attack dog. She'd betrayed his trust, turned on him, fought him, hurt him and then he grinned. Missed ya, too. There it was. Acceptance. With that, Gala couldn't help herself any longer. She burst into tears and tackled him with every bit of speed she possessed. Thanks.